Welcome to Medicaid Mastery, a cut above explaining the real long-term care Medicaid system.
Hello and welcome to Medicaid Mastery, a cut above explaining the real long-term care Medicaid system with Medicaid guru Tony Turbeville. I am host of Mac, and today we're going to untangle the complexities of crisis planning. And today's episode is, do you need an attorney for Medicaid planning? What families should know? Tony, welcome. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing well. Thanks for asking.
Awesome. Let's get down to it. So when does Medicaid actually require an attorney's involvement, sir?
Each state is different. Florida is particularly strict on the use of an attorney whenever planning is needed for rearranging assets. So, in other words, Medicaid looks at two types of assets, countable and non-countable. Medicaid planning involves moving the countable assets that are interfering with qualification into a non-countable category. That normally takes the advice of an attorney and any legal document that might be needed in the Medicaid planning process also requires an attorney. What does not require an attorney is the very difficult part of the application process, which is building a file that you can think of much like a mortgage broker does a mortgage. You're building a file that's being presented to Medicaid in the most favorable way possible. Plus, you're having to do all the administrative function of getting the assets in a particular order at the advice of an attorney, papering it up, putting it in the file, submitting it to Medicaid, and helping them understand what occurred. That does not require an attorney, and that is what we're particularly good at.
So why is it a mistake to assume you have to either go at it alone or even hire someone to help you out?
So it's a mistake to think that you must have an attorney or you must go it alone. Either way is a mistake. Having an attorney may be required, but it's only part of the equation, much as I had just explained. But going it alone 10 years ago was certainly an option if you truly didn't have any assets that were going to interfere with qualification. In other words, if you're an individual, you're only allowed to have $2,000 of countable assets. Anything over that will disqualify you. So if you have more than that, it's almost impossible to go it alone because the rules are just so sticky. It takes a lot of know-how to get excess assets through the system. If you're truly without assets, you can go it alone, but Medicaid these days in Florida is just so overwhelmed. Most of the experienced case processors have either been promoted or have retired out of the system because the Florida system is just so overwhelmed. The workers are unhappy, most of them, and most of them don't have the experience needed to really process the load of applications they have. For example, they're supposed to be done in 30 days if you provide them everything that you're supposed to. But frankly, a lot of times they're only looking at a case 60 to 90 days from the time you apply when they were supposed to have been complete 2 or 3 months ago. So you really got to know how to get through the system, and doing it alone is possible, but it is a very frustrating process.
So what's the difference between what your team at Platinum does and maybe what an elder law attorney offers?
Well, an elder law attorney can offer what we do, so to speak. We cannot offer what they do, which is the legal advice and the legal documents. However, what is very, very different is the application process is a very complicated process, particularly when there are excess assets. Most law firms have one, maybe two people, if they do what they consider to be a lot of Medicaid, to process these cases. They're also doing estate planning and real estate transactions and all kinds of other stuff. So they can't give their full attention or expertise to Medicaid. At Platinum, we have about 30 employees, and all we do is Medicaid applications. We do about 100 of them a month. It's our thing. It's all we do all day, every day, 222 working days a year. So we're particularly good at getting that application through the system and finding an attorney with that kind of expertise. They may be out there. You might luck up and find one, but how do you know who really has the expertise getting it through the system? Any attorney can hang a sign out that says they're an elder law attorney. right? They can advertise that. They may have done 1 case, 0 cases, 5,000 cases. How do you know? You don't know which elder law attorney really has the experience. We know who has it. We know who knows what's going on. We can send you to the right attorney.
So sidebar question: do you guys feel like you get overwhelmed with the how many things you see? You know, the 220 a year, or do you 222 days a year? Do you get overwhelmed? Is your workload sufficient? Would you guys take on more or less? How do you guys kind of balance that out?
Sure, great question. So yes, we have a caseload that we make sure is manageable by what we call a Medicaid advocate. And I've spent well into 7 figures building software
Wow.
that does nothing but deal with processing Medicaid applications through the Florida system. To my knowledge, there is nobody who has software that manages this process. Most everybody's operating off a spreadsheet, and there's just too many nuances to manage it correctly that way. And let me also say that most attorneys use 1 or 2 strategies. For example, most of them will use what's called a personal services contract. And I'll bring this up probably in many of the videos that we do. But a personal services contract is an easy, fast way to solve the problem. The issue for the family is, however, the money that's protected through a personal services contract is fully taxable as self-employment income to the person who receives it in the year in which they receive it. So let's suppose that we're transferring $100,000 from mom to a child to protect it. Mom's going to be, let's say, in a nursing home, while Medicaid will work for home health care, assisted living, or nursing home. Let's just say it's a nursing home. You transfer $100,000. The child has 2 options. They can either report the income, which they absolutely should do, or not report the income and commit tax evasion. If they report the income, then they're going to have to pay about 40% of the money they receive to the IRS. And here's how I get to 40%. Because it's self-employment income, they have to pay the employee side of FICA, right, which is 7.65%. That's your Medicare, Medicaid, and all those social programs. But because it's self-employment income, you're also the employer. So you have to pay the employer side, which is another 7.65. So we're now at 15.3%. And a reasonable estimation of an average tax bracket is 25%. So 25 plus 15 is 40%. So they take 100,000, transfer it to the child. The child has to choose between tax evasion or paying the IRS 40 grand. I don't think either one is a good choice, right? But that is the go-to for most attorneys. We, over the years, in conjunction with attorneys that we work with, have developed many strategies, and we have 3 goals in mind. Keep the money liquid, because we haven't talked about the other strategies where often you lose control of the money. So keep it liquid, pay 0 tax, and keep control of the assets. And very few attorneys know how to do all 3 of those. Now, again, we can't give the advice. We can tell the client what we can get through the system, but the attorneys that we work with understand how to do it. And if we're working with another attorney, we can help them understand how to use a better strategy for the client. So if the client says, hey, I really want to use my attorney, that's fine. I'll work with their attorney, but I will also discuss with their attorney better options than their attorney probably knows on their own. I hope that wasn't too much.
No. It was perfect. But can you unpack that a little bit more as far as how you kind of collaborate with attorneys and work with attorneys? And how that process works for people.
Sure. So most attorneys really want to come up with strategy, right? They want to come up with the ideas that help clients save the money, and there's nothing wrong with that. We're happy to help them do that. If they're a little less experienced, we'll lend our experience to them. What most attorneys don't like doing is the actual application for Medicaid. Many of them do it because they don't know that there's a good alternative. But again, they don't necessarily do it as well as we do because they're just not geared for it. They do Medicaid as an addition to their practice. We do Medicaid as our practice. That's it. That's all we do. So we will say, look, attorney, you provide the legal advice. Even if it is us helping you, you can, ask the questions and go through the process and work with the client to decide what strategy is best for them, then you can create the legal documents. We'll put a second set of eyes on them to make sure that they meet all the Medicaid criteria. And then we will navigate everything through the Medicaid process, and we'll deal with the family on here's the information that's needed. Most of it we'll go get for the family. And here's a big point, if I may take a side jaunt. A lot of attorneys will tell the family, okay, go bring me all this information. Bring me the last 5 years bank statements if there's been any gifting. Bring me all the proof of the life insurance policies and the annuities and the brokerage accounts and whatever else is out there. You bring me the proof. When you get me everything I need, I will file for Medicaid. The problem with that is most of the time the kids don't know where all that is. If it's a community spouse, maybe the one that took care of all that is the one that's needing the help. They don't know where it's at. We write, and this is part of what our software was developed for. Let's say they have assets spread at 20 different institutions. We load all those assets in, we push one button, and it sends a verification letter to all 20 of those institutions to get the verifications for them. So within 48 hours, we're getting verifications back, meaning that if somebody hires us by the 15th of a month, no matter how complicated the case is, if they work with us, we'll get everything and get it rearranged and apply for Medicaid by the end of that month, which means they're going to get benefits for that month. Most attorneys, it'll be 2 or 3 months afterwards by the time they get everything gathered because they're relying on a family that doesn't know where everything's at. So we save them 2 or 3 months compared to most attorneys just by being geared for doing only this.
Any scenarios where your team steps back, maybe because it's legal advice, or do you know what I mean? Do you if somebody comes in and talks to you and you're like, oh, wait a minute, this might be more pertinent for you to talk to a lawyer? Does that ever occur for you guys?
Absolutely. It occurs on a regular basis because we're all trained. My staff's trained to know what the difference between explaining a strategy and recommending a strategy. Or somebody says, should I sell this asset or how do I handle this? And we go, oh, that's legal advice. Here's a way it could be done, but you need to talk to your attorney and let them confirm whether that is correct for you or not. Now, if they're already a client and they ask us a legal question, we're going to shoot an email to the attorney and say, hey, call the client. They're asking this question. It's legal advice. We can't give it. But most of the time, once the legal strategy is determined, most things are not legal advice at that point. It is getting it through the application process. We're following the legal advice that the attorney has given to the client and also instructed us to carry out for the client. So we won't give legal advice, but most of the time they'll be dealing with us directly.
And any scenario where a client, wouldn't have to go to an attorney, kind of try to stop themselves from going to an attorney, because I think some people get kind of intimidated by the process. Is there any way where they can circumnavigate that and kind of just, like get through that and just handle and just go with platinum? Or will they always have to deal with an attorney in some capacity?
Well, there are scenarios where the client, doesn't have to rearrange any assets and they already qualify for Medicaid and they just don't want the hassle of doing it themselves. So they hire platinum from a convenience standpoint, much like, hey, you might be able to do your own plumbing, but you don't really want to, so you hire a plumber. Yeah. In those scenarios, they would not need an attorney. But let me point out that 99 times out of 100, probably 999 times out of 1,000, they don't have to physically go to the attorney. They can do a Zoom call, they can do a telephone call, and all the documents can be dealt with by phone, fax, FedEx, email. One of our employees as a notary can come to them, or if it's geographically not feasible, we'll arrange for a traveling notary. The attorney delivers the documents directly to the client. They sign them, get them notarized with or without our assistance. and then send those documents back to the attorney. The attorney then logs into our system. They have their own username and login where they can only see their clients, and then they can upload the documents to us, and it notifies us, hey, the documents are there, and we're off to the races in applying for Medicaid.
So how does Platinum help in the process of, trying to vet the right attorney? Like, how do you guys help with that?
Most of the time, people choose to work with attorneys that we've had a multi-year relationship with and have done oftentimes thousands of cases with. And so they're already pre-vetted, so to speak. However, if a client says, look, I really want to use my attorney, then I would call the attorney and say, hey, Mrs. Smith was here. It's a mutual client. Here's what she's wanting to do. And they've generally already told their attorney, right? And we explain to the attorney, here's what we found out from the client. Here's the assets. Here's the income. Here's the family dynamics, all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. Here's a couple of ways that we could get this through the system. What do you think? And then we're going to let the attorney talk to us and ask us questions to determine, does it make sense or does it not? And then, if it does, then we'll move forward. If it doesn't, we'll find out what the heartburn points are, work with the attorney to overcome those, work with the client, make sure everybody's on the same page. And that usually actually leads to a new attorney relationship where attorney, like an estate planning attorney typically now is sending Medicaid cases to us and either working with us as the attorney or saying, look, I don't want to do Medicaid. You go see these people. They'll introduce you to an attorney that knows Medicaid, and they'll get you what you need. So it's up to the attorney whether they want to stay involved in the case or whether they want to pass that off.
Can you walk us through a case where the attorney-partner relationship worked, just right?
Yeah, we have them every month, all month long. So for clarification, an attorney can do their own documents, or they can have a paralegal service that we've developed. And for disclosure, I do have an ownership interest in the paralegal service. But the paralegal actually worked for me for about 3 or 4 years processing cases. So that paralegal knows exactly what we do on our side. She's now worked for attorneys for a number of years processing Medicaid applications. She used to do just one attorney that hired her to do it. And now she's expanded into dealing with any attorneys that we deal with that want to use her service, and for a relatively nominal fee, she'll develop all the documents. Once the strategy is determined, right, and the attorney says use this strategy, she'll develop the documents, submit them to the attorney for review and approval for delivery to the client, and then keep the attorney involved in the pieces that they need to do, but take the administrative burden off of them. So that makes it pretty seamless when you have somebody who understands the legal side and somebody who understands the application side that's essentially playing liaison between Platinum and the attorney.
Tony, thank you for your time, sir. I appreciate you.
You're so welcome. Thank you for yours.
And thank you for tuning in to Medicaid Mastery with Tony Turbeville. To connect with Tony and his team, go to platben.com. That's PLATBEN.com. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment on your favorite podcast app. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.